Okay, hi guys. I hope you're all doing well. I miss you. I just want to take a little bit of time to go over the reading comprehension passages that you worked on. So I'm going to go through all three of them in this one video. So it might be a little bit on the long side, but you'll know then, when we're done with each passage. So if you want or need to take a break and come back to it later, then obviously you can do that and just watch a little bit at a time. So I'm just gonna kind of go through the questions, give you some strategies, kind of explain the answers. And then obviously if after you watch this and go over your work, if you're still confused about anything or you have anything to ask me, then just either contact me in Remind or send me an email. Okay, so passage A, this is an excerpt from a novel, so it's fiction. Obviously, you can see this is kind of a long passage. It's almost 100 lines long. So it's a little over 2 full pages. It's like about 2 1/3 pages. And it is actually kind of an interesting little story, but it is difficult to maintain focus, especially when you know what you're doing is, like a test kind of a situation, even though this was just practice. So I really strongly suggest that you read it in pieces. Again, that does not mean that you skip over parts of the passage. You're going to see as we go through these questions, it's actually super important in this one that you don't skip parts of the passage, because you're really not going to get a feel for the character and the conflict that he's facing if you skip over parts that aren't in the questions. But you can see question 1 is making reference to lines 1 through 19. Okay, so that's actually like a nice little chunk to start off with. So if you go back to the beginning, obviously I'm not going to read this out loud to you, because you don't need to hear me reading the whole thing to you, but you're really talking about the first 3 paragraphs here. So that's a pretty good chunk of the passage to start off with and take a look at. And what you see is you first have this idea in line 2 of how Richard thought London was going to be. Okay, that he had originally imagined London as a gray city, even a black city. Sorry, I'm trying to highlight this. It doesn't seem to want to highlight right now. From pictures he had seen, he was surprised to find it filled with color. Okay, so he had an expectation that it was going to be kind of drab and dreary, and it wasn't so much. And then it starts to talk about how London has grown over the course of literally millennia, because it's talking about 2,000 years before, and how it encompasses all of these other towns around it and all of these things. And then the last part of this is kind of the key to the answer here. The London grew into something huge and contradictory. It was a good place and a fine city, but there was a price to be paid for all good places, and a price that all good places have to pay. So when we go back and look at the choices, the question's asking, why would the author include the description of London? Okay, so what it is showing, out of these choices, okay, the best answer, and I don't love the way these are worded, but it's not saying that Richard dislikes it anymore, or that he really dislikes it at all. So it can't be 1. It really doesn't talk about his career at all, so 2 is irrelevant. Okay, so then you're down to 3 and 4. It's not talking about Richard being frustrated with the city. It says that he had a certain expectation and that expectation turned out to be different, but he's not frustrated. So answer 4 is the best one. Okay, it's merely, what's his life like there? What does he learn about this place? Okay, so question 2. Now, the good news is you already read this part, so you have to just go back and look at it. So what's the figurative language in line 15? It's just as a pool of mercury encounters and incorporates smaller beads of mercury. So what kind of figurative language is that? Say it with me. It's a simile. Okay, so what's the point of that simile? It shows the growth of the city. Okay, it's like a liquid that spreads out, and the other little beads of liquid kind of get absorbed into it. So it's showing the growth of the city. Okay, so now question 3 jumps ahead to lines 24 through 29. So this is going to illustrate my point. You would have stopped reading after the third paragraph here. Okay, so the question is about this paragraph down here that starts with "but Jessica changed all that." You can't skip this fourth paragraph, okay? Especially in a story. The story isn't going to make sense if you skip parts. So you need to start at line 20 and then read all the way to line 29. So what you find out there is that Richard, and this is why it's important, Richard didn't like to go to tourist stuff. That's what you learn in this paragraph. Okay, found himself taking London for granted. He prided himself on not visiting the sites. So he didn't like the tourist stuff. Once he starts dating this girl, Jessica, he starts doing all that tourist stuff. Okay, so what do you understand about Richard? That once he starts dating this girl, he'll do stuff that he didn't want to do before. So it's choice 2. Okay, choice 2. Tolerate undesirable situations to please others. All right, so question 4. In the context of the text as a whole, which statement regarding lines 41 through 43 is true? Okay, again, super important that you don't skip anything, because in this paragraph right here, at the bottom of the first page, the paragraph that starts at line 30, if you skip over this, you are going to completely miss the fact that this girl, Jessica, who he's dating, is super controlling and tells him what to do and is trying to change him. Okay? She tries to tell him how to dress, and she tells him when they're going to get engaged. So she's a very controlling person. So then the question is asking about the top of page 2. Why do you go out with her? Asked Gary. She's terrifying. Richard shook his head. She's really sweet once you get to know her. And then Gary picks up this plastic troll doll and says, I'm surprised she still lets you play with these. Okay? So when you look at the question, is Gary jealous? No, because it seems like this girl is actually a little bit of a nightmare. So answer choice 2 also doesn't make sense. Gary isn't moody. Richard isn't keeping secrets, but he is, choice 4, in a state of denial regarding his relationship. Okay? He doesn't realize how bad this girl really is. Okay, question 5. How do lines 46 and 47 contribute to Richard's characterization? So again, you can't skip. So, and there's no point in skipping here because it's like, you'd be skipping like 2 lines. So, there's a metaphor here that's kind of the key to answering this question. So, it was a Friday afternoon. Richard had noticed that events were cowards. They didn't occur singly, but instead they would run in packs and leap out at him all at once. So what's this metaphor saying? That all of a sudden, all of these things that are going to happen or he has to take care of kind of jump out at him. So he's really not very good at managing his time. Okay? And it starts to talk about, and you have to keep going here and read a little bit more for some context. You have to read the rest of the paragraph. So he obviously forgot something, because his girlfriend, fiance, keeps telling him that it's the most important day of his life. And obviously he kind of forgot to do something. So when you look at the choices, choice 1 is the best answer. He's inefficient at organizing his time. That's why the events jump out at him all at once. Okay, so now Sylvia, who was obviously his boss's assistant, okay, calls him up and asks him for something that the boss needs. And he says he needs a little bit more time because obviously he's not done with it. So the question's asking about this part. Again, you can't skip anything because the part that precedes this through line 60 is showing you how kind of disorganized he is. He is supposed to have done something for his fiance. He's supposed to have done something at work. He lost a page of it. he's kind of a little bit, like scatterbrained at this point. But so now you have the assistant who moves in an atmosphere of crisp efficiency, which is the opposite of how Richard is, right? He's kind of a mess. So, because she's the opposite, the best answer there is contrast. Okay, she's a contrast to Richard. Okay, 68 through 72. So, again, no skipping, but you're going to read this this little section in here, but then where the question is asking about is right here. Okay? So you're just going to read this whole conversation that he has with her, which I think was a little further than what the question's asking about. But again, you want the context. So they have this conversation, and during the conversation, she tells him that he better have confirmed this reservation, and she doesn't trust him to get to the restaurant on time, so she's going to go pick him up and they're going to walk together. So again, she's really telling him what to do, and almost kind of treating him like a child a little bit. So the best answer would be 1, okay? Her domineering nature. She's very, very bossy. All right, the use of dialogue in 68 through 81. So the good news is you already started to read some of that dialogue, the part that's between him and Jessica. And then, sorry guys, it moved. Okay. Then, actually, you already have read that whole part, right? I'm sorry. 68 through 81. Yeah, so it goes a little further. That's right, because it goes into his conversation with Gary, too. Okay? So, what do we see here in these conversations? You already read the conversation with Jessica, where she's telling him what to do. Then, Gary, his coworker, reminds him that they are supposed to be having drinks to go over this account together. So, again, he kind of has a couple too many things going on at once. Again, he's a little bit scatterbrained. So what's the mood? He's stressed because he knows that he hasn't handled everything he needs to have handled. Okay? Number 9, Richard's question in lines 97 through 98 reveals his. So this is the very end of the passage. So at this point, you have to finish reading the passage. Again, you can't just skip ahead to the end, because what you need to see is in the part leading up to the end, he tries to call this restaurant that they're supposed to be going to, and he finds out that he didn't actually make the reservation he was supposed to make. So at the end, he says to her, "Do you think they'd give me a table if I phoned back and offered them extra money?" So what does that show about him? He's a little desperate at this point, right? Because he has this kind of mean girlfriend, and he hasn't done what he was supposed to do. So the best answer there is choice 4. All right. Question 10 is a little bit tricky, I think, because you have to kind of think about a central theme of the whole text. So this again illustrates why it's so important for you to be reading the whole thing, because how are you going to come up with a main idea or main theme if you didn't read the whole thing? Okay. So now when you look at these choices, the answer is choice 1, okay? And when you look at these choices, to an extent, you can almost play a little bit of like one of these things is not like the others. Choices 2, 3, and 4 are all very specific to conversations that Richard is having or things that Richard is doing in the passage, whereas choice 1 is an idea about the whole thing, okay? Like, in order for something to be good, there also has to be bad. And you're kind of getting that, like, through the passage. Okay, so 1, you have more of an idea, whereas 2, 3, and 4, it's more just, like, stuff that happens. Okay, so 1 is the answer there. All right, guys, so that is it for passage A. All right, so if you want or need to take a break before we go over the poem, feel free to do so. Okay. So we are going to move on to the poem that's called We Are Many. Now, a poem you can't handle the same as a prose passage. So passage A and passage C, you're going to read in chunks like we just did. A poem you have to read through. Sometimes you have to read it through twice. You have to get a feel for the whole thing. You have to get a feel for the mood and the tone and the subject that the speaker is talking about. And in this case, you have the speaker talking about himself and the way he wants to be versus the way he actually is. And the way he hopes he would handle problems versus the way he actually does. So there's kind of a lot going on there. Now, you also notice here that there's only 4 questions. So, that can be a good thing or a bad thing. Sometimes it's great because if the poem is tricky, you don't have to answer that many questions about it. And also, sometimes it keeps them a little bit more broad when they only ask you a few questions. The flip side of it is if it's a poem that you do really get, usually the answers are all going to kind of go along with the theme, and it can be a little bit easier than if you have a bunch of questions, but there's only 4, so this will be pretty quick to go through. The overall purpose of the figurative language in lines 12 through 14 is to show the narrators. Now, you can't just read lines 12 through 14. You have to read the whole stanza, okay? And granted, you should have read the whole poem already, but you have to reread the whole stanza. On other occasions, I am dozing in the midst of people of some distinction, and when I summon my courageous self, a coward completely unknown to me swaddles my poor skeleton in 1,000 tiny reservations. So, what's the gist there? The gist is he wants to be brave, but he kind of isn't able to be. Okay, 1,000 tiny reservations meaning like doubts. So, what's the best answer choice? Okay, is that he has a lack of self-confidence. Okay, choice 3. A primary function of the questions in lines 19 and 20. So again, you need to go back to the poem. You need to completely reread this whole stanza. Okay, you can't just look at the very end of the stanza again. You need to see the whole thing. Okay? When a stately home bursts into flames, instead of the fireman I summon, an arsonist bursts on the scene, and he is I. There is nothing I can do. What must I do to distinguish myself? How can I put myself together? So he wants to help in this terrible situation, and he feels like all he does is make it worse. And how can he fix this problem? So what's the best answer? It is clarifying the narrator's dilemma. Again, the whole poem is about him trying to be who he wants to be and it being difficult to accomplish. So it's another example of his dilemma. Question 13. The contradictions presented throughout the poem serve to illustrate the relationship between. This is a little bit of a main idea question of the whole poem. So you might need to go back in and skim through a little bit and see, kind of double check how he's feeling. But this is more of a main idea question. So the relationship between what? We've been saying the whole time that the narrator wants to be a certain way, but sometimes he just can't live up to it. So what's the best answer? The best answer then is 4. Okay? The narrator's idealism and his reality. He wants things to be this, perfect, wonderful kind of, fitting his ideas. But it can't always do that. He can't always do that. All right, and then last but not least, question 14. All right, you need to read the whole last stanza again, even though it's asking just about the end. While I am writing, I am far away, and when I come back, I have already left. I should like to see if the same thing happens to other people as it does to me, to see if as many people are as I am, and if they seem the same way to themselves. When this problem has been thoroughly explored, I am going to school myself so well in things that when I try to explain my problems, I shall speak not of self, but of geography. So, again, they ask about lines 42 through 45, but the idea is really in this whole stanza, and the idea is that what he wants to explore is whether he's the only person who feels this way. If he's the only person who feels that there are, kind of warring pieces of himself that, he can't always control which one comes out at any given time. So, the solution can best be described as universal. He wants to see if this can apply to all people and if all people or most people feel as he does. Okay, so that's it for the poem We Are Many. So again, if you need to take a break, this would be a good time to pause it and do that. Okay, and then we are going to go on to the final passage you did, passage C. This is a pretty long, dense passage. It's not quite as long as Neverwhere, the first passage that you guys did. But, you know, that has some dialogue in it, and it's a story, so, you know, it kind of goes a little faster to read it. This is nonfiction about dog hearing, so it's pretty dense, and in all honesty, if you're not particularly interested in dog hearing, it's really not that interesting. So very important here to just read it in chunks. If you try to read this whole passage, it is almost guaranteed that, again, unless this just happens to really pique your interest, you're not going to be paying attention by the time you're about halfway through. So you're going to do this in pieces. So the first question asks about lines 1 through 11. So there's a great place to start. Now, if you are feeling a little bit more ambitious, the first paragraph ends at line 18. So you could always just read the whole first paragraph and get that done. But if you want to stop at line 11, you could stop where you get up to right here where it says, you know, animals in our local environment. So you could just do this section. So in the beginning, it is discussing the pitches that dogs are able to hear as opposed to the pitches that humans are able to hear. So how does it introduce the central idea of the passage? It's explaining the frequencies dogs can hear. It's really a very straightforward question. Okay, you have to read carefully, but the answer is right there. That's what it's talking about. Lines 19 through 22. So at this point, if you didn't finish the first paragraph, you do have to finish the first paragraph. Okay, and I would suggest, because the second paragraph ends at line 25, just read the whole thing. Okay, that would be like the next chunk you would read, would be the next paragraph. So it's focused on lines 19 through 22, which is talking about how the dogs can understand, in a way, understand what humans are saying because they detect a change of pitch. So, like, the example that they give here is that a question ends in a raised pitch. Do you want to go for a walk? Okay, so that's the example that they're giving. So what idea do they support? It's that humans can verbally communicate with dogs, okay? It is not that dogs can learn the language. The passage is saying the dogs don't understand the words, they understand the tone and the inflection. Okay, so they're not learning the language. This is verbal communication because of the way you're saying it. Okay, lines 19 through 25, it's basically the same section. This is why I said you should just have read that whole paragraph. Because when you come to the end of the paragraph, what it says is that it says, imagine the confusion generated by the recent growth of uptalking, speech that ends every sentence with the sound of a question. Okay, so when people talk like that, it's going to be confusing to a dog because they are listening for the pitch. So humans can possibly confuse dogs by altering the intonation of familiar words. So if you're altering the way you're saying it, it's going to confuse the dogs. Okay, 18, lines 26 through 29. So again, my suggestion to you would be just read to the end of the paragraph. You're going to have to focus on the first half of the paragraph to answer the question, but I would just read the whole thing while you're at it. So you're going to kind of be chunking this one like a paragraph at a time so far. So if dogs understand the stress and tones, the prosody, okay, so stress and tones are prosody, that's what that means, of speech. Does this hint that they understand language? This is a natural but vexed question. Since language use is one of the most glaring differences between the human animal and all other animals, It has been proposed as the ultimate incomparable criterion for intelligence. So basically, being able to use language is an indicator of intelligence. So, an indicator of, what's the best answer? Higher level thinking, okay? Don't confuse problem solving skills there with intelligence. It's not talking about solving problems. It's just talking about being able to, think. Okay, in lines 33 through 36. So again, as I suggested, you really should have read the whole paragraph. So now you would just take another glance at the second half. All parties agree, though, that there has been no discovery of a human-like language, a corpus of infinitely combinable words that often carry many definitions with rules for combining words into meaningful sentences. This is actually the key to the answer to the question. Okay? Animals can't make words into sentences. Okay? And that's basically the answer to the question. They can't create human sentence structures. Choice 3. Okay, question 20. The examples in lines 38 through 42. So, that really is this whole paragraph, more or less. So you would just read the next paragraph. Okay, so, again, you're reading the whole passage, but if you read a piece, do a question, you're going to be able to maintain your focus a little bit better. So there are examples of species mimicking the sounds of other species, either for the purposes of protection or for the purposes of hunting. Okay, so it shows how some animals can imitate behavior and sound. Okay, that's choice 1. All right, again, that's pretty straightforward. It's talking about different animals and how they can imitate other sounds. Okay, now the author uses the term gibberish in line 60. So you see here on question 20, we left off with line 42. Now we're looking at line 60. So again, I'm sorry to tell you, you really can't skip anything. So now you have to start here. Okay, the research with dogs suggests, and you really do have to read all the way, okay, the question is 60, line 60. Okay, so you're going to read a couple paragraphs at once, okay? So it's a little bit bigger of a chunk, but again, it's not a good idea to skip. You're going to miss some of that, main idea, especially if you skip the beginning of this paragraph that starts at line 53. Okay, so this is saying, try asking your dog on one morning to go for a walk. On the next, ask if your dog wants to snow 40 locks in the same voice. If everything else remains the same, you'll probably get the same affirmative reaction. The very first sounds of an utterance seem to be important to dog perception, though. So changing the swallowed consonants for articulated ones and the long vowels for short ones, na for a poke, might prompt the confusion merited by this gibberish. So it's asking about how the term gibberish is being used. So it's saying that if you change the sounds, change the way the words sound, the way you're saying them, it can confuse the dog. So the best answer there would be 2. Okay, there is a complexity to spoken sounds, and the dogs kind of pick up on that. Okay, which sentence best restates a central idea in lines 57 through 65? This is actually nice because basically all the questions asking you to do is look at this little section. So that would start here. Okay, through line 65, so here. It's just asking you to look at this little section and basically come up with a 1-sentence summary of the gist. So that is, it's basically what we were just looking at with just a little bit more added to it. And the best answer for that is going to be how we speak to dogs is more important than what we say. That's the exact point they're making is if you say it the exact same way, you can change the words and the dog's going to react the same way. Okay, it's changing the way you say it that's going to make the dog confused. Okay, the author's reference to motherese. So you would have to pick up here, okay, at line 65, okay, with this sentence, it is not. Sorry, having highlighting issues, okay, and you're going to have to read past where it first mentions motherese, which probably to answer that question, you have to go at least to line 70, okay? So we coo to infants in silly, giddy tones called motherese. We might greet a wagging dog with similar baby talk. Infants can hear other speech sounds but are more interested in motherese, okay? And dogs respond similarly to babies. So why does the author refer to motherese? Because it makes a connection between how the babies react, how the dogs react. So the best answer is styles of spoken communication and likely responses. We talk to the babies and the dogs similarly, and the babies and the dogs kind of react similarly. Okay? Last question, okay? Hooray, you made it to the end. The primary purpose of the text. So it's sort of a main idea question, but it's asking, like, what's the point? What was the author trying to do? So what was the author trying to do here? Trying to help the readers understand how dogs experience and understand certain sounds. Okay, so the best answer would be 3. Okay, it's not talking about how to work with dogs, myths about dogs' behavior, or new kind of training. Okay, so none of those are really relevant to the passage. 3 is definitely the best answer. Okay, so I hope that this helped you guys out as you checked your answers over. As I said, if there's anything you're still confused about or anything you need to ask me about, just get in touch through either email or Reminds. Okay, and I will talk to you guys soon. Okay.